Good morning. It's day 1378 of the 2024 election campaign.
Feels like it.
Yeah. Welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. I have the coffee. Stephen will be doing the politics, and you'll probably see some buses going behind Martin. How's election week going, gents? Because we are now in a week's time we should know what all the results are.
I bloody hope so in a week's time, because something's going badly wrong if we're still at a count in a week, isn't there? I think we're supposed to be declaring at 4 o'clock in a week's time, 4 o'clock in the morning. That's what the estimates say, but you just don't know, do you? No. So it's all going very well. I think it's just relentless, and thinking that 6 weeks was going to be a sprint and it would disappear in a blink, because you're basically chasing every single hour and doing stuff every single hour. Like the last couple of weeks it's been really hard, because I think you sprint so fast at the start to get stuff done that there's not much energy left from anybody this week. I think on Monday last week we did BBC live debate and a hustings in the evening, and that's utterly exhausting. So running on fumes at the moment, but we're still doing stuff. Was out leafleting last night until about 9:30 in Gransden, so still more to do today. Doesn't stop.
I bet it's the whole thing, isn't it, about sort of no complacency with any election. I was even when I was a huge favourite as a county candidate and whatever, just never ever sort of stop. And that's the only way is you've got to fight for every seat, because there's all the stuff about the polls, but you've got this thing about shy Conservatives and what impact that might or might not have in the election, and the fact that the polls might close and all those things, and they make a difference. They even make a difference to me, as a district councillor, because if people are minded to vote Conservative for the parliamentary seat as a district council candidate, that'll knock on to people automatically putting a cross against a Conservative vote in for my ballot as well.
Yeah.
So it's just no complacency is the only way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's also I think still you're right about the shy Tory effect. People don't want to sort of say they're going to be voting for the Conservatives, but also there's still a lot of undecideds.
Yeah.
And it's. I mean, I think this is part of the reason for all the difference in the various MRP models is how they account for undecided voters. So particularly in close seats, it could actually make a real difference to how things go. 6 weeks too long for an election?
I didn't think so at the start. Well, it's difficult to go any shorter, isn't it? Because actually, especially if it's a snap election, getting the logistics right and getting your stuff designed, printed, and out into the electorate in time has been a real challenge. And I think I've done. I got my leaflets to the Royal Mail a week ahead of the postal vote deadline. And that meant that my leaflets got out. And I think other even big parties have struggled doing that. So it's difficult to do stuff any quicker than 6 weeks, I would imagine, in a world where we still use print. So it's certainly long enough though, because I get the feeling that people are a bit bored of us talking about it now as well. I think everybody will be relieved when it's over.
I think if everybody knew the election date was coming, I think 6 weeks would have been ages and ages, because a lot of the literature would have been prepared in advance and everything else. I think it's been condensed a little bit by the fact that it took everybody on the hop. But if you think about if we moved to fixed election dates and fixed term parliaments, which I'd like to do, you'd probably have a year's campaigning. So sorry about that, Stephen.
Yeah.
And that's part of my problem is really if I narrowly missed it, actually the campaign needs to start now, doesn't it? Starting from 6 weeks. I would argue that I've been campaigning around here for the past 6 years, and that wouldn't have changed very much. But it cost a whole constituency. Then it's been a bit of a handicap for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's but they're interesting times, and it's one of the things about elections that I really enjoy is it is a good chance to get really close to the electorate and get a good sense of what people feel, and that makes elections worth it on their own. If you want to be a politician, You need opportunities to get really close, and day-to-day conversations and everything else all work. But when you get all that feeling and all that sense of how people are with politics about and local issues, all condensed into a short period of time, it's helpful to give focus to politicians as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing is, it is that, yes, the only thing is elections are exhausting. I think they're exhausting for the candidate, but also I think particularly with the general election, they're exhausting for voters, for the public generally as well. You know, you have the coverage has been nothing but elections. I mean, the other thing is a lot of the coverage has been about polls rather than issues.
I would argue that 60% of the campaign has been about gambling, but
I think when you're in the bubble, is that it's difficult to keep a focus on the national campaigns as well. And so, by the time I've got in from canvassing all night, and there's an election that I'll put the election debate on with Keir and Rishi, but you don't pay much attention to it, and so it kind of focuses you down still on local. I thought it would be me checking up on the big campaign news that's breaking in terms of hustings, but there hasn't been much, has there? There's not been a lot of policy talked about. It's all been about scandals and nonsense and bickering. So.
Well, that's because there isn't any policy. The reality, it's one of the disappointments about this election is, it's the deceit around taxation, on the national campaign, and it is deceit. And it's not just deceit from one party; it's deceit from all three, all of them basically. There isn't any behind that. There's no meat to anything, and it's such a disappointment to me, because that's what people deserve to hear. But sadly, the parties don't seem to have the imagination to drive anything different.
But I don't know. I think it is. I mean, at the moment, if Labour went out and said, we're going to put taxes up by lots, would Labour actually get in?
I don't know.
I think. Sorry, Stephen. I think the issue for me is not necessarily that. It's to say we are going to have an honest conversation with you about politics. What I'd prefer Labour to do is to say, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put into legislation that tax thresholds will increase by inflation every year. And at the same time, we will be overt. We don't want to raise. We don't want to raise the level of income tax. We don't want to raise the level of national insurance. Our ambition will always be to cut it. But we'll be honest with you. If we need to raise taxation, we'll do it in an honest way with you. And I think that conversation is something that will attract the people. And that's the point for me. This idea to say we're not going to raise national insurance, we're not going to raise income tax levels. But actually, we are going to. We're going to do it by not increasing thresholds. It's just deceitful.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to that whole trust in politicians, isn't it? It's difficult to see when everybody feels like the tax burdens are really high, that people are talking about we're not going to, we're going to blame Labour for increasing taxes. We're going to reduce taxes. Nobody believes it anymore, and I think that doesn't speak to credibility of all this. This is a question from Sam, who's my neighbour, who's also a Green Party supporter, but he's still a nice bloke, whatever. Which party do you think has been most honest on taxes? And that's a bit of a loaded question, because I've sat in 5 hustings now, and the Green Party are very, very, very honest on taxes. They're going to increase taxation. They're going to introduce wealth taxation. That's part of their whole argument as well. And I think as an independent, I've also been honest, is that that you've got 3 choices. We've either got to tax people more, we've got to borrow more, or we've got to cut things, and those are all those 3 things are unpalatable. And so I think sometimes you do have to talk about investing to grow. And so I think the Green Party has but but they're also writing from a position where they're not going to be in government. They can propose some fairly radical things that are never going to happen, and it always feels a bit like they're talking from writing a blank checkbook, to be honest. So I do appreciate that honesty, and more. And I think we should have more honesty in politics. I mean, I go back to the thing where when the original £2,000 a year thing came about, and there was that fake costing. It wasn't fake. It was not very well worked out costing, line by line costing of how much all these different things are going to cost you. And I actually thought that was a really interesting way of framing this. Like, yeah, you support the war in Ukraine, but this is how much it's going to cost you. Yeah, those kind of things are quite important. I think you support Trident. This is how much it's going to cost you. Having those costings would be good for everybody, and then we could really decide what we want to spend our money on.
It's what I wish the Conservatives had actually done during the COVID crisis. As they were throwing money out, is to be explicit and say, this is what it's costing you. You are, and demonstrate it and show what it's costing. And if they'd done that then, and put out some graphics and things that said, this is what this is costing you, we're going to have to pay this back. I actually think they would have been in a lot better position today. But all they did was glorify and giving money away, which they were right to do what they did during COVID, but they should have been a bit more honest about the long-term costs.
Well, eventually you have to pay the piper. I don't know. I think I do agree. I think the difficulty is for one party to come out and say, look, we might have to raise income tax, say. Frankly, the Conservatives would then turn around and turn that into Labour's tax bombshell. Maybe if you're ever going to do it, this is the election to do it at.
It's too late now. It's way too late. It's something that you would need to do at the begining of the campaign.
Oh, no. I know it's too late to do it for this election. But I'm sort of trying. I think there is actually a genuine desire amongst Labour not to massively raise taxes, because it's seen as a sort of that has an economic effect as well. And also, people are, like individuals, are paying a lot of personal taxes already. The other thing I want to say, just on how much this is costing, there is an issue when people do these costs per person, because that's not all taxes are levied on individuals. And so when there's people work out the cost of something, and basically divide the cost of something by the number of people in the country, and it's like, well, that's only part of it, because there are things other than people what pay tax.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I do believe that one of the things that's coming in the next 5 years, and I think it would happen whoever came into Parliament and whoever governed. It's going to be Labour, but whoever governed, is I think some sort of taxation by the mile in vehicles, I think is an inevitability, and I wouldn't be too disappointed with that. But I do also think, sorry, this is making me sound like a right socialist, but I do think there is a thing about understanding the principle. It's not socialism, by the way, about the wealthy being able to pay a bit more towards taxation. Because of where the tax burden is, and I say this within One Nationism, there's a principle. I've forgotten the name for it, but it's all about the wealth. Noblesse oblige is the phrase. Nobility obliges, and it's about the principle that those that are better off have an obligation towards those that are worse off in society. And taxation is one of the ways that demonstrates itself. There are others, and if you think about pre-NHS, there is an argument that before the NHS existed, it wasn't the working classes that really suffered from lack of healthcare. It was the middle classes, because the working classes were getting healthcare basically through schemes that were funded by the wealthy, through voluntary donation and the like.
They existed. They were. I think the issue was they were patchy. Some were good, some weren't, and in some places they didn't exist at all. Yes, there were some very generously funded ones, but they were patchy.
Yeah.
And you know, so yeah. I mean, what I would say is, yeah, bloody hell, Martin, that sounds a bit socialist, doesn't it? But you know, you know, slightly more seriously on the payment by the mile. I mean, we will, if that happens, we will get a lot of sort of conspiracy theory nonsense, which is unfortunate because it's an interesting policy that's worth looking at. I mean, I think there are some legitimate concerns about what's going to be needed in terms of the technology for that to happen.
Well, I mean, there's two things with that. Just to say, first of all,
Yeah.
the amount of taxation that is going to be paid through fuel tax is going to go down and down.
Yeah.
The amount of tax revenue. So, you know, the move towards electric cars and everything else is going to make that happen. And so we've got that which means tax revenue from fuel tax is going to go down. And so something has to compensate for it. And it seems to me as a natural progression towards that, away from that. And you can partly compensate for any increased tax revenue by reducing taxation on fuel and stuff like that. Yeah. But those people that have bought electric cars on the basis that they're not paying fuel tax will be fuming.
Wow, they won't be fuming. They don't use internal combustion engines. I mean, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, it's a bad turn of phrase.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a really interesting. There's also something instinctively that seems fairer. You know that, my brother who does 50,000 miles a year pays the same it's not road tax, vehicle excise duty as someone with a similar car who's going to the shops once a week, and just instinctively that doesn't actually seem like a very fair way of doing it. But while we're talking about the general election, there's another election there are other elections going on, and of course there is one that is that is capturing the world's attention. How's your campaign going? Tell us about your campaign, Martin.
It's very, very good. The feedback I'm getting is fantastic, and the amount of offers of help I've had, for what is basically a district council election. I wouldn't say a little district council election because they're really important, but the amount of offers of help I've had and everything else have been great. The feedback I'm getting is great. But one of the things that is interesting, I said I would take. I would take the administration at Fenland on with some of the issues that we're dealing with. And one of the things that's happened this week is a bizarre decision by a councillor to abstain in a vote, a Fenland councillor to abstain in a vote at the combined authority on the March area transport study funding, which basically resulted in £7 million of funding for March being, I would like to say, delayed rather than lost. And it was a really weird thing, because the reason he did it was because he felt that £7 million was too much for March and it should be distributed around the whole of Fenland. What? The March area transport study, this is something we deal with in Fenland all the time, is this infighting between the market towns. And it's one of the things that needs to be dealt with. What it actually does, two things. It does, but first of all, this has been years in the making. This March area transport study, so it's not something that's come off out of the blue. It's been years in the making. So the opportunity to say no before officers have poured and put hundreds of hours of time into it and stuff like that has been there. But secondly, what it does is reinforce something that I've been saying, that the approach that the administration at Fenland take towards the combined authority doesn't help the whole of Fenland in getting money, because you make it difficult to work with them. And with things like this happening and stuff, that if they've got money available, they're going to look elsewhere. And Fenland is a place that needs investment. There's no two ways about it. The lack of connectivity there is to Wisbech as a town is a great example. The need for a Whittlesea Relief Road, is becoming greater and greater. And you can think of all sorts of examples, and this just doesn't help. My instinct is that this was a councillor acting as a lone wolf, that he had no authority from Fenland politically or otherwise to do what he did. But I have written an open letter to the leader of Fenland District Council, basically saying to him, we need to know whether this was with your endorsement or whether he was acting as a lone wolf. I'm not expecting a reply, but I've published the letter on my blog. And that's part of, what I've said, that if I get elected, I'll hold Fenland to account. If I get a reply from the leader, I'll publish it. Now I'll talk about it next week if you want, so we can, we can see. But it's bizarre about how the politics works. It's very small thinking, and with the combined authority and the funding that's coming into Cambridgeshire through the combined authority, we can't afford that sort of small thinking.
Yeah, I agree, and it feels typical of what's been going on at the combined authority across the last 3 years. It's been almost like a scorched earth policy, isn't it? And lots of resentment. So you're ascribing it to Fenland politics and March getting more than we'll see, or that's the perception. But there is also this general level of distrust in Nick Johnson from the Conservative representatives, and that causes loads. Maybe that's not a factor here.
I would argue, just to put some balance to that, Stephen, that I think there was an element of that when
James
when James was mayor as well, from some of the other districts as well. So I don't think it's something that's just for the last 3 years. What I have seen is huge improvements in the last 3 years.
But then the political landscape has changed in 3 years as well, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had Huntingdonshire change, we've had Peterborough change, and so that's made a huge difference to Nick. He's got more people who are at least from kind of the progressive left on his side. But it's a problem with the combined authority, isn't it? Is because in other places, Andy Burnham and Andy Street, who sadly lost his mayorship, have had to work together with district councils from different political persuasions and done a good job of it, and we just don't seem to be able to do it here. I think partly because it's so small, isn't it? It's quite a small group of people, and so everybody's voice is louder.
Well, yes and no. With Andy Street, one of the things that really impressed me with Andy Street, and it's also true of Andy Burnham. I like Andy Burnham a lot. I like him a lot more now he's not in Parliament, by the way, because he was a bit of a political animal in Parliament, and he himself has said he did too much of that sort of stuff. But what they've managed to get is to create a vision and then to get everybody rowing behind them. It's why Andy Street, it's such a shame that Andy Street lost, but he was doing it from day one in Birmingham and in the West Midlands.
Okay, so the thing is, I think it took Nick a while to get going and so on, but I think he did everything he could to try and get people, moving in the right direction. I mean, even appointed a Conservative as a deputy mayor, which turned around and bit him in the posterior. I'm afraid I think on this one, the way that some, a few particular councillors behaved was the worst kind of politics, where they didn't have any substantive disagreements. They were just trying to screw over the other side. And I think things have improved partly because of the change in the political complexion of Huntingdonshire, and so on. But also because certain personalities were removed, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think there were some issues early on in Nick's administration, and I suspect that if you talk to Nick honestly, he would say the same. The issue is that one of the senses I get is that is what is souring a lot of people's view. That some of the people's view about that administration as a whole. But what I would say is Nick has moved on beyond it. We've got stability in the mayorship. In terms of the mayor's office, the chief exec, the people that they're employing, and that stability is something that's been needed for a long time. And we need to move on from where we are now rather than look backwards. And and that's in the interest of the whole of Cambridgeshire.
Definitely.
And it's one of these things about a rising tide raises all ships. If everybody can work together, everybody will benefit, irrespective of your political colour.
Well, absolutely, and this is the thing. I'm hoping that the with the improvements coming online for buses and so on, that will make
Yep.
well, as you know, I mean, it's the name of this show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be yeah.
It's so the bus thing is really important, because that was one of the things that, you know, I had a leaflet through my door from the Conservative Party in Fenland that basically absolutely slammed Nick for the bus precept.
Yeah.
You know, but and also said in that leaflet that that Whittlesey would not benefit from the bus precept. When there were already plans afoot to increase and improve bus services in Whittlesey through it, and it's that sort of stuff that disappoints me, because you need to be honest about it. The bus precept for me, yes, it's nobody wants to raise taxation and do stuff like that, but for the first time in a generation, we are talking about improvements in bus services and significant improvement in bus services around Cambridgeshire. You know, and I was in the cabinet at County Council when we were having to make cuts, and it's a horrible thing to do, and we're reversing it around, and we need good public transport.
Yeah, I mean, I think this. I don't want to be too partisan about this. Something that Ben Opsey-Jetley has been saying, that it's not bringing any benefits to certain parts of the Huntingdon constituency, and it's like, well, it's step one. It's not perfect, but it's still an improvement.
It's a fair point, though. It's difficult for me to stand up in Abbottsley and Worsley and Granston, which typically don't have any buses, and justify them spending 36 quid a year. And I get it, and I support it, and it's part of a longer vision. But still, for those villages who have no buses, I think we have to basically. He needs to talk more about the long-term vision, so I understand how they can be included in it.
Yeah, I mean, sure, absolutely, but there is a thing, but something doesn't have to, things can be improved. The fact that, something doesn't yet benefit everyone, I don't know, I thought it was a bit off. Sorry, Martin, I cut across you.
Yeah, just part of my campaign is to look at a demand responsive service for Whittlesey, basically as a result of learning from the Ting, because I sit and look at not just Whittlesey, but sort of the outlying villages and things in Whittlesey that don't get much of a bus service. And even parts of Whittlesey where the buses don't reach, and you think, well, a demand responsive service, like the Ting, would do great things for Whittlesey, and that's the point about the bus precept is, yes, it's not perfect for everybody, and there's some people certainly benefiting more than others, and arguably some people aren't yet benefiting, but it's a starting point from which we can really start to grow. Good public transport is good for economies. If people can reach work, it's great. And there's a really good example, the IMET Centre at Alconbury Wheel that opened a few years ago. That closed down, not because it wasn't a great place to teach kids, teach young people and young adults, not rather than kids, but it wasn't because of that. It was because people couldn't get there.
Yeah. Well, the big question is why we put the county council's headquarters in a place that people can't get to as well. Especially when I was doing citizenship ceremonies every week, and you had like 100 people turning up to be new British citizens, and every single one of them had to drive or take a taxi because it's very, very difficult to get there on public transport. Well, that's a bigger question. And not
well, there were still plans to put a railway station somewhere around Alconbury Wheel, but
we were talking about that at Huntingdon Town Council yesterday, actually, whether we think that's ever going to happen. Be interesting.
It would be great for it to happen, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because it involves laying new rail line. If you look at Cambridge North Station, one of the advantages that Cambridge North Station had was you were building a station on an existing rail line, which cut the cost down. It made it a lot easier. That was quite a process, and that was Nick Clark's vision, actually, and Nick Clark drove that in a big way. It was my predecessor as leader, but you know, we basically and Nick basically forced the agenda on that. The county council at one time was going to fund it based on a 7-year payback model, and the government looked at it and saw it and said, actually, we'll fund it. But that was the original plan. But it was all made easier because it was on an existing rail line, and it was an absolute no-brainer to put it there. As soon as you start putting rail line in, it becomes more and more expensive, and that's the difficult bit.
I mean, I think there's, yes, I agree. There's land reserved and so on. I think one of the things is, as well as extra line for the station and so on, I think that section which is triple tracked would need to be quad tracked. I mean, one of the issues with the East Coast Main Line is it's basically full, and if you put more infrastructure on it, you actually reduce capacity. So if you've got trains turning off at grade, they're having to slow down to make the turn in all likelihood, and that means that the sort of lead time behind them increases, and that can reduce capacity. So I think there are issues there. I mean, it would be great to see. But I hope it happens. But we will see what happens.
So here's a question, and this is me thinking off the cuff. So you can both shout at me. But is a rail line the answer, or is it something like a rapid transit scheme?
Well, look, we've been having these discussions in hustings for the last couple of weeks about the EWR scheme. So EWR is going to cost £9 billion for the whole thing, and a big stretch if it comes through my new constituency, which is 20 miles long, 75,000 people, and we've got a single stop, which is somewhere north of Camborne. Yeah, and my argument is that doesn't serve people around here very much. It goes to Cambridge South, which is great for biomedical campus, not so great for anywhere else. And we could build a light railway or a tram for a fraction of that cost, which would serve lots of the existing towns. Yeah, and could also go out to somewhere like Alconbury, and I think would have much less. A lesser degree of environmental devastation too. So I'm absolutely in favour of those things. And you think that an economy as big as Cambridge could afford to put in some sort of transit system, that served everybody.
I think it's more than afford. I think afford is part of it, and of course it's part of it. But isn't it also about? Isn't it also about? We're talking about. A city like Cambridge, a county like Cambridgeshire, if you can't do something innovative and forward thinking around Cambridgeshire, there's no hope. And I think that's important. But if you look down in Hertfordshire, they've got plans for a rapid transit system to link east to west in Hertfordshire, because that's one of their issues is north to south in Hertfordshire is great, but east to west isn't. And, that's a theme actually right up and down the country, actually, because all roads lead to London.
Yeah.
But you've also got up in Milton Keynes and Bucks and Northamptonshire sort of some plans for rapid transit up there as well, and so these schemes are evolving. And one of my concerns is that as these schemes evolve, but also as technology evolves, so you can start to personalize some of this stuff through technology. Actually, there might be a time when heavy rail starts to and the use of heavy rail starts to come to an end. There's schemes there's schemes afoot and things being developed at the moment that will allow it's a thing called the Flying Bum, by the way. I don't know if you've seen it, but I know about it because Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden has helped fund the project.
This is Airlander.
Yeah, that's right.
Fly.
And the idea of that is to start to move freight up and down the country, basically using a much more modern equivalent of a Zeppelin.
So that was developed in Cardington Sheds just across the border in Bedfordshire, and there was a test flight. There's a couple of test flights, and we went out and saw it, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was just stunning to behold, because of the scale of the thing. But then a few days later, it slipped its moorings and it blew away and got destroyed, and then it moved away from Bedfordshire, and it's now being developed somewhere else.
It's somewhere abroad, I believe. But I used to look after those sheds, by the way. As when I was, I worked at RAF Henlow as a civil servant, but as a title that's called OC SCAF, which anybody that's ex-Air Force will know about. So I looked after those sheds. So yeah, they're massive.
One of them is a massive soundstage now, isn't it? Lots of films are filmed there as well. I'm not sure what's happening to the other one.
I don't know. Yeah.
On the on the East West Railway, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is it's as somebody who quite often has to go west. I mean, and the thing is, this is it's hard to go west, east, west, wherever you're in the country. I used to have to go quite often from York to Manchester over the Pennines. And by train, that's a nightmare of a journey, in these sort of, old-fashioned, like 2 and 3 car, slow, rinky-dink trains that struggle to get up and down the bloody Pennines. I think there is a need for that east-west connectivity. I think one of the things that concerns me with East West Rail is they seem to be seriously talking about building a new diesel line in 2024, which just seems mad.
It's a bit of a red herring, that, though, because if you look at the embedded carbon cost of building a new concrete and steel railway, and all the houses that will accompany it, somebody estimated there's 8 million tons of CO2, and the railway will never recover that during its lifetime. And actually, the diesel electrification part is such a small part of that calculation that, of course, we should be electrifying the railway from the start. I'm completely in favour of that, but it's almost a bit of a red herring, and it almost feels like something that you put in, and it's a built-in concession that at some stage you go, we'll put batteries in, or we're going to electrify it, and we go, oh, well, that's all right then. And the truth is that those carbon costs are relatively small compared to the carbon cost of building the whole thing. And you can't make an argument, you can't make a business argument for building a railway, but you also can't make an environmental argument for building the railway, which is 500 meters wide, along 50 kilometers of grade 1 agricultural land. And that's part of the problem, is the cost of heavy rail is enormous, where a light rail would have none of those costs. It would be much.
Yeah, I wouldn't even use light rail. I think I'm a bit of I personally. It's about and I know there's a carbon impact on this as well, but it's about laying tarmac and putting technology on that tarmac, basically on wheels. That for me. We've got the technology to do that with driverless buses and things like that. And again, you're talking about linking Oxford and Cambridge together, two of the greatest intellectual powerhouses in the world. Why aren't you looking at, future-proofing it, looking at, what's it going to look like in 50 years and building on that? Because the university are looking that far ahead.
So are you thinking about something like the busway linking Oxford and Cambridge?
I'm not talking about the busway. I would not ever do the busway as it was done again. That's not a criticism of the busway, by the way. It was the right thing to do at the time, irrespective of the issues around development and delivery. But technology even has moved on from there. You don't even need that sort of technology, but you can, there are things that you can do. It would be a busway of sorts, but not in the same way that the current busway is done.
So just because I genuinely don't know sort of how the technology's moved on. It's
about the driverless technology that we've got now. So all you need to do is lay the tarmac down, and the bus will follow it, and you can tell the bus to follow it using technology. That's the reality, and you can do it at speed because you're not competing with anything.
That's the idea for the C2C busway as well. Is going to be on that kind of technology as well. I think it's not driverless, but it's automatically guided. It doesn't need the same kind of concrete rails that the St Ives busway does.
I would say it's not driverless yet.
No.
What does it run on? Does it run on a normal road?
No, that's the idea. You would have some dedicated tarmac for it. Sorry, go on, Stephen. You know about the other
Well, side. No. I think you probably have induction course and stuff built into the tarmac. It's not very expensive, and they'll just follow that. I mean, it's not a very complicated thing. It's pretty simple. Yeah. I think the C2C busway's got cameras to guide it, but the technology is improving all the time. And certainly by the time East West Rail has been built, we will have some autonomous vehicles on our roads. There's already some test vehicles flying about, so that's gonna come around quickly. Not, I think, as quickly as people think, because I think truly driverless cars are still a long way off because of a lack of processing power in the world. Basically, you have to do lots of simulations to make sure they don't crash into kill people, and that training is going to require lots and lots and lots of computers.
But actually, we're taking gentle steps towards driverless cars all the time. You look at what cars do on motorways now. You're literally pressing a button and it's taking you to the top of the motorway without you touching anything.
But that's the point. Just one quick thing. We're spending £1 billion on the A428 upgrade, between St Neots and Caxton. It wouldn't have taken a lot more foresight, would it, to build something into that road, an extra lane or an extra half a lane into that road, to take some of that autonomous transport, and you could have saved loads of money over East West Rail. But of course, that's a completely different project being handled by National Highways. East West Rail aren't involved at all. East West Rail are going to be coming along in a few years' time after the road is opened and digging up loads of it again and undoing some of the work, because they're two completely separate projects, and that makes no sense at all.
Yeah, there was at one point they had a guy called George Freeman, who's an MP in Norfolk, who I think is standing down this time around, which is a shame because he's a really strong One Nationist as well. He had a title as Future Transport Minister, which he claimed he was a ministerial post that he designed himself. But this is exactly what he was trying to look at, is how you integrate and better integrate using technology, the various transport sort of technologies and styles that we've got at the moment. And, that's the sort of thing we need to think about with innovative government. And then thinking about, with Oxford, Cambridge, again, going back to something I've talked about before, how you fund it is through something like TIF. Because if you get that right, it's a no-brainer. Linking Oxford and Cambridge, is a no-brainer in terms of the economic growth you get from it. And so, funding it through something like tax increment funding again, where, you basically borrowing the money based on tax growth is a no-brainer.
But East West Rail is not a no-brainer, because you look at the BCR figures and they're between 0.3 and 0.6. So for every pound we spend building it, we're going to get between 30 and 60p back. So that railway is not a no-brainer. And also the road connecting the western, so the whole of the A421 was supposed to be dualed the whole way to Oxford, and they cancelled the Oxford bit of it. So obviously there are some struggles in justifying these things economically, and there isn't a business case for EWR unless you include house building in it, and that's the real motivation of EWR, I think, is to unlock land for house.
Well, I don't think it's the real motivation. I mean, there's a reality, which is if you go back to the period between 2010 and 2015, Nick Clegg talked about significant house growth along that corridor as a way of so there's always been a vision that it's there, but it also makes sense if you've got Oxford and Cambridge linked by some sort of transport innovation, and building houses along there allows people to build careers basically from working in both the Oxford and the Cambridge economies, and it makes that there's some sort of sense in that. So I've stunned you both into silence.
No, I think Stephen is quite skeptical about the benefits of EWR. I think I don't know the detail, but I think I'm perhaps more open to it.
I used to say,
to carve up your constituency, is it?
Yeah. What I used to say when I was leader of the council, one of the things I used to say was if you can get goods, people, and data moving, the economy will thrive. And we're not good. We're not good at this movement of people, especially around our country. We're not good enough, and we need to get much better at it. And the issue about taking away farmland, I don't buy, because farm productivity is going to increase by about 20% over the next decade or so. So we can afford to give up some farmland to do stuff like this, in the same way that we can afford to give up farmland to do things like solar as well.
I mean, I don't know. I mean,
if there's a case to be made for East West Rail, then you need to make the case. There is no business case. They won't release it. So about 2 or 3 years ago, lots of the elected representatives in the region signed a letter to I think it was Grant Shapps, but whoever was the minister at the time, asking him to release the business case. It was led by Anthony Brown, who was then a backbench Conservative MP, and we've never had a response to that. And you know that if you're going to ask people to basically wipe out settlements like Tempsford, like Croxton, like Highfields, Caldecott, then we have to be able to justify on a quid pro quo basis. We have to say these are the benefits to residents now. This is how it's going to benefit us, or maybe benefits to the whole country by increasing east-west connectivity. I think most people are in favour of a railway line that heads from east to west, but this line makes no sense from a passenger perspective. It makes no sense from an economic perspective. And I genuinely do think if you read the East West Rail stuff, it's about building new, there's going to be like 50,000 houses around Tempsford, another 20,000, another 10,000 houses around Camborne North, probably. And it's about, building. So I think the estimate is it's going to increase the population of the around the railway by about 250,000 people. And that's a large number of people in the area of the resources. I'm not against house building, but I think house building should be planned by local authorities and not by a government by sticking a massive railway line through the middle of a rural.
But Stephen, the flip side of that is when you try and build housing and put housing in place, the first thing people complain about is lack of infrastructure, and transport infrastructure is a major part of that. So just to push back a little bit, what you're basically saying is, we shouldn't, it's turning that on its head. There's a reality. We desperately need housing. Cambridgeshire needs housing as well. And I think there's a recognition of that. There's all sorts of other issues.
But again, 75,000 people live in a constituency, and there's one stop, and that stop goes into one place in Cambridge. And you can't it doesn't allow you to get from Camborne to St Neots. That won't happen. Yeah, it doesn't help you get from St Neots to the Yeah, so it doesn't. The part of if you look at the western section, there's stops every few miles, and basically there's a stop in Camborne, stop in Tempsford, neither of which are actually in existing settlements. They're for new settlements, and that's the bit that doesn't work. If there was railway stops all along the line and people could use it as commuters, then I would be more positive about it. But as this kind of express railway through Cambridgeshire, it doesn't work, and it doesn't justify devastation. There has to be some balance between benefit and cost. And as far as I can see, people who live here, there isn't. I'm not a NIMBY. I'm all about the infrastructure, but this doesn't seem like a good use of £8 billion.
I mean, the argument about local people benefiting is important. We had the same thing with the A14, to be fair, because the new A14 and the new route for the A14, which I do think is a huge success. One of the criticisms of it was that they decided to make it a strategic road, which meant a lot of the old A14, where there's lots of roads going off it and all sorts of stuff. They reduced those, and they reduced the number of junctions there were. And there was a lot of concern and comment about that at the time. I do have some sympathy with that, to be honest. But that again, I think that's about use of technology. Again, trains are getting better at stopping. One of the things that stops you growing the number of places that a train stops is that every time it stops at a station, you're delaying the total journey time for that train. And so, but as train technology improves and trains are able to stop quicker, you can add stops in, and maybe they need to think and future-proof East West Rail based on that sort of thinking.
So there's a few things there. One is, you've still got physics to deal with. It still takes a lot of energy to accelerate a train, back up to speed. I think the space where you get more stuff on the line is with moving block signaling. It's a different one. I think that there's an issue that's worth exploring, which is around, sometimes you need to build a piece of infrastructure that goes through an area that brings no benefit to that area. Is that fair? So sometimes you need to build build a motorway. You need to build a railway.
It's
there's a
fair as
fast
long as you
line
can
that
make the
doesn't.
business case. If you can make an economic and business case for doing that, and it's open and it's transparent, and we can read it and we can see it and we can disagree about it and we can discuss it and perhaps change it, that's fair enough. But none of those things are available. And I've been involved in local politics, for 6 years, and for about 5 years of that, we've been discussing this railway. We've had consultation, and nothing has changed. There's been no engagement. There's no new information. We've kind of got a route choice, but even that route choice is a map where you look at it. And you could shift the lines, and you will shift the lines. You can't get like a GPX file which will plot the route, and you can see how it affects you. All you have to do is zoom in the low res PDF, and the whole thing is just nonsense. So absolutely, if you want to do those things, then make the business case for them, and then lots of I find in politics, normal people, there's always going to be a bit of not through my backyard, but people say, actually, I see that and I can understand it, and we go ahead, but they can't do that, and nobody's doing that. There's no discussion, and none of these things. We're at a general election campaign now where this railway goes through a big part of the new constituency, St Neots and Mid Cams, and we have Anthony Brown who won't basically state a position because it's helpful for Camborne, but it's not helpful for Highfields Caldercourt, so it makes it really difficult. And we have the Lib Dems who are supporting it, and then we'll say in Hustings, we don't support it for these reasons. And so there's no honesty. If we can't talk about these things during a general election campaign and have certain candidates like me saying, like, I think this is a bad idea and we should go back to the drawing board, at least pause things and think about it for a while. And if we can't do that now, when can we do it? Because 5 years time, it will be too late.
Maybe the argument is let's get the business case published. That strikes me. I mean, that's about government being open, and that's a reality about that. Because if the business case is predicated on housing growth, I don't have an issue with it. But I also agree, and it's right to campaign without that business case and without seeing the vision. It's right to campaign for local, for local stops and local provision. And maybe there's another way of delivering that, but I think that's the right campaign, Stephen. I absolutely. I don't think stopping East West Rail is the answer, but I do think being open about what it is. I wonder if part of the issue is the government are fearful about what happened with HS2, where politically it just became undeliverable. And whether that's part of the argument, because all the arguments through Bucks and stuff like that were with HS2 were horrendous, and they may have been less open about it as a result of learning from HS2. I don't know, but that's what I wonder.
Maybe, but the risk here is, of course, is that the railway will never be built, but the housing developments will all go into local plans, and we'll end up getting the houses, and we won't end up getting a railway, and so Tempsford will be washed away. It's not on our patch.
Let's be fair. Tempsford will probably happen anyway. Tempsford has been in the offing without East West Rail as a concept for a long time.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's necessarily fair. I do think with Tempsford, I'm not sure elsewhere, but I do think with Tempsford, the point about having a stop in Tempsford is because Tempsford is going to happen, so let's put a stop there, rather than let's put a route through here and slap loads of housing along it.
There's an FOI that appeared this week in which East West Rail justify the choice of Tempsford over what was called St Neots South, and their justification is that it allows Tempsford to grow as a separate settlement from St Neots, and so with its own facilities. But of course, at the same time as that, we've got Bedford Borough Council talking about building Little Barford Garden Village now, which is just south of St Neots. And so whatever happens, it all joins up into a conurbation, that stretches from Little Paxton, basically to Sandy, across Huntingdonshire, across Bedford Borough, and across Central Beds. And that planning is not joined up, and so lots of us raged against the Oxcam Arc and a million houses, but actually Oxcam Arc would have hopefully given us some kind of cross-border regional planning initiatives. Maybe it might be that they're going to put in place a development corporation for Tempsford, but at the moment, Huntingdonshire voters who live in St Neots don't have any say about what goes on in Central Beds or Bedford Borough, and I think that's a problem. And you can imagine the governance when it's finally built and you've got councillors from 3 different councillors determining how things work. It just looks like a nightmare.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, there is my gut instinct about the way the Labour government is going to be, and let's be blunt, we're going to have a Labour government, is that they are going to be looking at a number of these growth corridors as their way of delivering housing. So I don't think you're wrong, Stephen. The model they use to deliver them, I'm not sure, but development corporations of some sort, if they can speed things up, would be a sensible way forward. And you go up to Peterborough. And people in Peterborough talk with some affection about the development corporation that basically designed Peterborough as it is now.
And Milton Keynes gets a lot of ridicule, but Milton Keynes gets a lot of ridicule, but it isn't awful, is it? There's lots that's good about Milton Keynes these days. Modern Milton Keynes is quite a nice place to live. So I think we've demonstrated in Cambridgeshire with the whole GCP debacle that we're not very good at sorting things out politically. And so I'm not necessarily in favour of development corporations, but what we've got at the moment also isn't working, is it? So.
No, well, no, absolutely. I would prefer a development corporation to something like an area action plan, or some sort of scheme like that. Just because every time I've dealt with area action plans, much as I can see the purpose of them in terms of how local authorities are better able to influence planning, they slow things down, and I don't think the Labour government want to do things slowly. I think they want to get on with it. And so, development corporation with planning powers probably makes sense.
Thing is that there are. Look, we need to change the planning system. I think everyone accepts that, but it's how you get it done, how you get infrastructure delivered or housing delivered without going through a long planning process, while also still maintaining sort of democratic engagement and making sure the things are delivered properly. But you know more about this than I do, Martin, but there's a tension between doing things right and doing things quickly.
Yeah, but I would argue, as somebody that makes a living out of engagement, and particularly around planning, you need to engage, but what you need to do is engage better, but do it less often, and that would speed up the process. As an example, and also understand that engagement will never ever provide you perfect solutions. But what it will do is, if you use it properly, and councils use it properly, and I mean councils, parish councils, and whatever, you will improve development schemes if you engage and talk. And you will improve schemes, but it's understanding that you're not going to get everything, and there's a balance to be struck, because there's a need for housing, there's a need for business premises, and all those things. But it's about engaging less, but doing it better and making it work better is what I would say. And that the flip side of that is, if you're a council at the end of that process, just shutting the door to somebody to say we don't want it is never ever going to get you progress. It'll end up with development that you're not influencing. But that's part of how the process needs to speed up. But I think you made a point, David, about the amount of documentation for I can't remember what it was, but 39,000 pages or something like that. That's the sort of stuff as well. Yeah, that's right. It's that sort of stuff as well that we need to sort out. But it's also about making sure we've got the planners in the system. And it's not only more planners, it's better planners as well. Most planning officers are really good, but just a drive for more isn't enough. It's got to be a drive for more of the right quality.
Well, I mean, but yes, I mean, I think there is real issue with a shortage of planners. I mean, so, you know this better than I do, but also I'm just bringing up the thing now. And I appreciate that Alconbury Weald is a big site. But I'm just looking one up. Okay.
Should I tell you a success about Alconbury Weald as far as timescales are concerned?
Yeah.
When the enterprise zone was put together, this was Hunts as well. By the way, they put together a planning framework for Alconbury Weald that meant that once a site and once the enterprise zone board approved a a business or whatever to locate there, and they wanted to put a planning application in for a new business or premises. The planning framework they put around, I've forgotten the words for it because I'm thick. No, I'm getting old. But what it meant was they were turning around planning applications for those new premises in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing we need to look at, and how master planning enables you to speed things up rather than just create a bureaucracy.
Absolutely. I mean, so I can't find it. But there's one of the applications which happened to me the other day was put in 2019. Now I know we've had COVID and so on, but yeah, come on, 5 years, and this was not for the Albury master plan. This was for one relatively small part of it. I'm going to take a question from Lara Davenport Ray.
Oh.
The Bedford Borough local plan has been paused by the planning inspector. What does this mean for the future of St Neots southern border?
So Laura is a Green councillor who's in the joint administration with me at HTC, and is a fantastic councillor. What does it mean? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much influence we have over the. So my big complaint about all of this local planning is that the Bedford Borough local plan, you read through it, it doesn't even mention Huntingdonshire or St Neots, despite the fact that they have plans with the little Barford Garden Village to build right up to our borders, and that's part of the problem. So I don't know what's going to happen because it's been paused, but I think we've just agreed that because of East West Rail and other pressures, that Little Barford and Tempsford, which is Bedford Borough, are probably going to be built anyway. So you even look at things like Love's Farm. I don't think, or maybe it was Alcobee, one of the big developments around here wasn't in our local plan and got put in afterwards. So it doesn't necessarily change anything, but I don't think it's going to stop those developments having. They're already going out to consultation on Little Barford. Go on, Martin.
So yeah, what that says to me, if the planning inspector has paused it, it means that they're requiring Bedford Borough to make changes, and that may be because of political interference. Bearing in mind, somewhere in the middle of this local plan process, the mayor changed for Bedford.
And that's the problem with local planning, because we're at the early stages of putting together our local plan now, which, as you know, that does go on for years. It's a very, very careful process. And like part of what we'd like to do is leave that as our legacy as an administration, in case, in the unlikely opportunity, we didn't get voted back in a year and a bit's time. But as you say, changes in political priorities can sometimes swerve those things as well. So
every time I see significant political interference in local plans, they come unstuck, and I don't know whether that's happened in Bedford or not, just to be fair to them. But the best thing for politicians to do is influence the priorities for the local plan, be really robust about what those priorities are, and then trust your officers to move forward. It's right to challenge as you go forward, and maybe have some say and some tweaking, but you've got to put a framework in place that officers can reliably work towards, and if you do that, I think it would work. But local plan processes are far too long. I really like Michael Gove's idea of 30-month local plans. I really like the idea of allocating a plan with outline planning permission as well, outlining major sites with outline planning permission as part of the local plan process. I think that would have speed things up as well. But I don't know how much change the planning inspector is asking for. And so you don't know how much of a delay that's going to be.
And in terms of political interference from across the border, one of the things that I think as St Neots members we responded to is that Little Barford and Tempsford are all very close to the River Great Ouse and on the floodplain as well. And those upstream massive property developments can have an effect on the flow through St Neots, both negative and positive, actually, because my view is that big housing developments tend to have lots of suds built in and can actually help to solve these problems, but at least in the public perception, they're quite controversial.
So I mean, absolutely. I mean, and you see the effect as you can see the water moving down the Ouse when it's heavy. something that Laura said, that Hunting District consultation on our updated local plan priorities due out later this year. We were talking about this yesterday at Huntingdon Town Council about sort of what our schedule is and how we're going to be responding. So, fun and games. Martin, can I just go back to saying about outline planning commission being given with a local plan? Is that, and this is my ignorance, is that effectively what they call zoning?
The answer to that is I don't know. But what they talked about was this idea that you're allocating a site in a local plan, okay, which means you're effectively saying development is going to happen on that site. Then you're applying for outline planning permission, which basically says, in principle, we agree with development on this site, normally with means of access committed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a similarity between those two things. So why not pull them together? That's the principle around it. By the way, Huntingdonshire's local plan, it's something I'm quite close to for various reasons, and I'm a big fan of the way Huntingdon is approaching it, and driving it by the people strategy and stuff like that. I think it's really good. So but that's the principle about what it is. There's a sort of sense in saying those two things, merging those two things makes sense. It puts a bit more work into your local plan, but actually what it does overall is, I think it would save time.
And presumably that makes it more predictable as well. From a developer's perspective, if you I think I've said this to you before, one of the issues with developers, if you create more certainty, they will be willing to give more back, because it's the uncertainty and the fact that developers have to speculate in order to get sites that basically eats money. Some of these sites, they're putting millions and millions of pounds in on speculation, and if you can take the uncertainty out of it, you can give more back. And so if you can effectively grant outline planning permission at the same time that you allocate a site in a local plan, you're creating more certainty, because you've then not got the fight to get a site allocated, get a site planning permission as well, or outline planning permission. It's how long that process takes, well, and the certainty. I mean, this is the thing with developers, we've got, with any development, we've got a laundry list of things that we want funded by Section 106, and so we want everything on a stick, and we want it yesterday. I mean, and obviously we're going to get all of that. Having more money, if you can take out some of that uncertainty, which means there's more money to put back in, I think is good all round.
Developers have got to be careful, because what they're not allowed to do is what they call inducement, and the balance on Section 106 is really important with this. There's got to be a link between what they provide and the settlement itself that they're developing, or the housing that they're developing. And once you stray beyond that, you get into the realms of a thing called inducement. I'd like to see that changed a little bit, because it is right that if where communities feel there's pain in housing happen, they have to have a sense that there's some gain. And at the moment, what you're having to do is effectively play that game around the Section 106 and SIL regulations. And I'd like to see that change a little bit, just so that developers could do the right thing. And it's the same again, more certainty. Developers will play that game quite I think quite amiably. And I also think it would help the development process a little bit as well. The planning process as well, and the confrontational aspect of the planning process.
Well, we've been going for a.
Can I quickly answer a couple of questions at the top? If I do it quickly,
go for it.
First one is what are the relationships like between candidates, from Simon. So one of the lovely things about general election, and especially in our constituency, you get to do hustings and you get to hang around with the other candidates in the green room, and you get to realise they're normal people.
And you get to like some of them, even though you disagree with them politically. So Guy Lackland, who is the reform guy, I agree with almost nothing that he says, but I definitely want to go out for a pint with him after the election because he's a really interesting fella. And actually, Anthony's quite a nice chap as well. So I think that the relationships are cordial and even friendly. Catherine Fisher also great. There is a bit of frostiness between some of the candidates, though, if I'm honest. Yeah, but I guess that's natural, isn't it? And that's part of an election campaign.
Can I name which one?
Go on.
In your case, I know which one it is. It's the Labour.
Which one? Go on. Yeah, I mean, but from the very start, from the very first time I met her, she was frosty with me. And I mean, that's the way it is. I'm not going to try any of that.
I think you covered it last week. Some of her behaviour has been a bit. Some of the things she's put out have been A, wrong, and B, shocking.
And part of being in an election campaign is sometimes you have to call out those things, yeah. And I'm trying to be even-minded and nice, but that's part of politics, isn't it? Yeah. And so the other question that Simon's asked is, do you get any central support from government for election costs? Is no. I mean, and so we got some big banners around town, and one of them was vandalized last night. I'm thinking, well, that cost me like nearly £100 that banner. Yeah, and we're going to fix it. But actually, so on this campaign, I haven't added up all my election. I have to do it after the election.
The only support you get is with the free post, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's great. Yeah. So the Royal Mail thing is amazing. So every candidate gets to get a leaflet or a piece of communication sent out to every address in the constituency. Now we have to pay for the printing costs for that. So printing 50,000 leaflets is what it is going to cost you, $3 or $4 grand, I reckon, $3 grand, depending on what it is. So, but that is very generous, and I think that single thing makes standing as a parliamentary candidate more tenable for smaller people, because we've managed to deliver 75,000 leaflets. Delivering 50,000 leaflets across the whole constituency by hand is beyond the realms of most non-political parties, starting from where we started from. So we've delivered half of that and had 50,000, but actually all the costs are coming to me. I've had a couple of generous donations, but mainly it's going to cost me about 10 grand.
I have to say, one of the reasons why independent candidates don't often make impact is they can't afford to run a campaign. A proper campaign, and I have to take my hat off to you, Stephen. You've one of the things you've done is made that happen. When I stood in Nottingham in 2010, I wasn't in a target seat. I was never going to win Nottingham North. I got a good result, but I was never going to win it. But we had two constituencies that were part of the Nottingham area that were target seats, and what was happening is central office were bunging up loads and loads of leaflets and stuff to go into those target seats, sort of generic conservative leaflets. But locally, they decided to use personal leaflets. So there were all these generic leaflets floating around in the Nottingham office. So all I was doing was going into the office every day and asking what leaflets they'd got, nicking them, and just sticking them around the doors in Nottingham North.
So I think I've out leafleted many of the political parties, including some of the big parties, which I think is credible. It's cost me a lot of money, but I was always going to do that. I think the campaign expenditure for the 6 weeks is maximum is 20 grand, and I will have spent 10. But of course, the bigger parties spend that money outside of the campaign as well. And in terms of my vandalised banner, there's like Simon, who used to be a Conservative Party agent. He's a good friend of me. Disgraceful. Simon and I have lots of banter. He claims to have once voted for me, despite the fact he's only ever voted Conservative his whole life in the county council election. So I'm very thankful to him. He said he's not going to vote for me in this election, though. So and he's taken to vandalising my banners. Apparently, it wasn't Simon, but
I mean, that's allegedly. A confession. To be fair, that's a confession, mate.
I'll get the roses on him later. It won't be the first time. Shall we end it there?
Yeah.
So this time next week, I don't think we're going to be doing one on Friday morning next week, mate. I don't know, actually. I might be roped into it. I mean, because our count, we're supposed to declare at 4 o'clock in the morning, and realistically, by the time I've got home from Doxford, it's going to be 5 or 6. It would be a good argument for sitting up and going to bed afterwards. And maybe have me on as a new MP.
It'd be great to do it. Do you know, Stephen, and get your feedback immediately afterwards. It'd be excellent. I know you're retired. That'll make it.
Let's say we're going to do it. If we're not sure about the count.
Have you ever fallen asleep on air before?
Several times today, nearly.
It'd be great. And am I allowed to mention that I'm doing the BBC next Friday afternoon as well?
That's good as well. So
Yeah,
are you doing it
yeah.
as an election commentator?
Yeah, just they've asked me just to do 2 or 3 5-minute slots every hour over 4 hours between 2 and 6 o'clock Friday afternoon. So it'll be more as Keir Starmer sort of gets in a cab and goes to Downing Street and starts announcing his shadow cabinet, I would imagine, and anything else. Oh, his shadow cabinet? That'd be a surprise. His cabinet.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, that sort of stuff. I don't know exactly, but they've asked me to come on next Friday afternoon.
That's
So
good.
I've not been asked on this time, which is which I would love to have done, but I'm not.
We've done overnight before, haven't we, Dave? And it's been
it's
been great fun. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
especially with Paul Stainton. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been nice because the last time, we did it a couple of times when Labour has got absolutely shellacked. So I remember I think it was last one. It was like Labour have won a seat in Glasgow, and that was good news. So it would have been nice to do one where Labour's doing well. But
are you going to the count as well, Alex? Or you with David? You must be going with Alex, aren't you? You staying up?
Yeah. No, I'm going to be one of the what's it called polling things.
Polling clerks.
Yeah.
Counting clerks. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. So I'm
agents.
Yeah, I think sub agent. I think my role is mostly going to be fetching cups of tea, but we'll see what happens.
We were told last night by the returning officer. Go on.
Hopefully, your job will be to keep Alex off the ceiling because she'll be so happy.
Yeah,
hopefully.
But in terms of the actual role of the counting agents, we were told yesterday is like you can contest disputed ballot papers if you like, but we're not going to listen, and we've never agreed to a change. And also, if you want a recount, you might better have a bloody good reason because we don't do those either. So it's almost like, I'm not sure how much value there is in the role.
I can say again, when I stood in 2010, I had my son and my wife as counting agents for me. My son was, I think, was 19. Right when we did this, and he was an absolute monster. He was challenging everything. I mean, it was fantastic, and he loved it. But yeah, he was an absolute monster.
I know. I mean, I did that with the local election, the last set of locals, and I was there with a sort of opposite number from the Conservatives, and there's a Liberal coming in and out. And for the most part, people are pretty reasonable about it. It's where there's a ballot where it's not clear. Yeah. And the returning officer says, look, what do you reckon about that? And the returning officers have, unless it's absolutely barn door obvious, they'll go, oh, what do you reckon about that? And I think people are pretty reasonable in saying, yeah, that's, it's clear what their intention was. It's not often that I don't know. I thought people were pretty reasonable about it. Anyway, we should probably wrap up.
Can I tell you a story about that? This is a story that my friend Jeff Harper, who you may know, a very experienced political agent Jeff Harper was. He was also leader of Fenland at one point. He was saying that at one count, somebody put a contested leaflet in front of him where he put a cross against one person's name and they'd written a very nasty swear word beginning with B against another person's name. And Jeff claims that he got that ballot that vote discounted because the voter had identified himself.
So a nasty word beginning with B. Did he call him a blighter?
Yeah, absolutely.
A blackguard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, let's end it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Cheers.
See you next week for the results.
Cheers. Good luck next week, guys.
Thanks. You